Am I ready? Okay, welcome everyone. Today we have a fantastic guest here, Duff McDuffie. Hope I pronounced it sort of okay.
Good.
He is a coach and trainer, lives in Boulder, Colorado, the United States. And for many of our members, we have actually read some things about it. He was kind enough to write an article, which we published, translated and published in this book, which was about NLP and this, is it science or is it pseudoscience, and so on.
Yes.
Today, the topic is anxiety and transforming anxiety. And, well, that's just about what I was going to say. So would you like us to, if we have questions, to ask during, or do you want to take all the questions later?
No, yeah, let's take questions as they come. That'll be great.
Okay.
Make it more interactive.
Okay, good.
Good. So should I just begin, give a little introduction?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. And I don't know how the video works in terms of whether it'll highlight me or not, but I'm sure you can figure that out. So yes, thank you so much for having me here all the way from the United States to talk to you in Sweden. It's morning time here, so it's evening there, but we're all connected globally. And so we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety and transforming anxiety with NLP today. So to just start out, I like to just ask, what is anxiety? What is it? And the way I think about it is anxiety is an emotion. It's something we feel. And how I learned in NLP, you might have learned a different way, is that there are three components to everything in our experience. There is the internal state, there is the external behavior, and the internal representation. So you have internal state, external behavior, internal representation. So with anxiety, how do we break that down? So, well, you have the internal state. Many people are familiar with this. You have the rapid heartbeat, some sort of feeling in your body. It might be tension in your throat. It might be something in the chest or butterflies in the stomach or something like that. Right? So there's a feeling in the body, usually in this kind of area. I can't see lower, but from your belly to your throat. There's a external behavior. And that external behavior is typically avoiding the situation that causes the anxiety. So, there's some situation, maybe it's public speaking, and you continue to avoid it because it feels like you're going to die. So you don't do it. And that makes you feel safe and you're okay as long as you don't do public speaking. And then there's the internal representation, which in NLP, that's really a way of saying thinking or behaving. So an internal representation can be in any of our five senses, our modalities, right? Visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory. Usually there's not a lot of tastes and smells, olfactory and gustatory. It's usually visual, auditory, a lot of that. Kinesthetic can be as well, but that's a different kinesthetic than the feeling of this anxiety. It's more like the feeling of your body or touch or that sort of thing. So usually visual and auditory internal representations. So anxiety has these components, right? It's got a feeling, it's got a behavior, it's got a thought. And so in NLP, if we want to transform anxiety, we have a lot of tools. We have a lot of techniques. But instead of giving you specific techniques, just use this technique, it'll work every time. Instead of doing that, we can talk about the principles, and then you don't necessarily need a specific technique. You can work with the person in front of you or work with yourself in a very precise manner, eliciting the structure of their problem, how they're doing it, their strategy for anxiety, and then transforming that. So there's a couple ways that I often start. A couple ways I often start when I'm working with someone with anxiety. But even before that, I like to talk about my own experience because I had a lot of anxiety myself for many, many years, from an early age to maybe 30. I was just in anxiety pretty much every day, most of the day. That was my baseline state, was feeling very anxious, very nervous, very stressed. And it was core transformation, which is an NLP process that really helped transform that for me. And then some other NLP processes that also helped transform that for me as well. So I know that this stuff works because I've done it myself. And that gives me a lot of confidence when I'm working with clients too, that they can see the end of this. Nowadays, I've experienced virtually none of that internal state of anxiety on a day-to-day basis. Once in a while, of course, we all get stressed, but that is not my baseline. My baseline is calm inside. I still have some avoidant behaviors. I think probably most of us procrastinate on some things and put off doing taxes or other difficult activities sometimes. But even that isn't nearly as bad as it used to be for me. And I also do public speaking on a regular basis, which was something that I avoided in the past. So getting back to how do we start with somebody if we're working with anxiety, one of the first places I start usually is either with the internal state or the internal representation. So internal state, most people are aware that they're feeling bad when they have anxiety, but they're not necessarily aware of the details of that. And without those details, we can't really make those precise changes that we have in NLP. So the first thing we often have to do, besides getting rapport and acknowledging that this person's feeling bad, and maybe normalizing a bit, it's normal to feel anxious, or humor. I often use humor with people, exaggerating. Oh, it can't possibly be that bad. I mean, whatever, that sort of thing. But then we need to get into their experience. And so one of the first things I often ask people is, where do you feel that feeling? So revivification first, step back into that situation in which you feel anxiety, and then where do you feel the anxiety in your body? Where is it located? Often it'll be in the stomach, the chest, the throat, usually not in the feet or the fingers. There's specific locations that it shows up. So then we need some more details. You can get the size, the shape, right? So you start with location, you get size, shape, you can have a color. Now that's when you start to translate from kinesthetic to visual. You're using your imagination. But once you have size, shape, location, color, now you have lots of things that you can adjust, because these are submodalities, right? So the modalities are the five senses. The submodalities are aspects of those five senses, as you probably know, because you're an NLP practitioner or trainer. And then we can start adjusting those things. So there's lots and lots of ways we can do that. We can shrink down the size of the feeling. We can move it to another location. We can explore different colors. If it's red, you can change it to blue or yellow or green, or allow the unconscious mind to create a different situation. There's a number of techniques that involve spinning the feeling in a different direction. So Richard Bandler has one version where he has it either spin this way or this way to start and see which way it's spinning, or this way or this way. And then you reverse the spin the opposite direction. Nick Kemp has a different version of that where he asks, where does the feeling start and where does it move to? And people will say things like, oh, it starts in my belly and it moves up through my throat and into my head. And then it explodes out the top of my head, or something like that. And then he says, which way does it spin as it moves along that path? This way or the other way? And people, oh, I don't know. Let me see. I guess this way. And then you invite them to spin it the other way. And notice what happens if you have the feeling start and spin the other way as it goes along that path. And they go, oh, it feels better. So there's lots of things we can do once we have the feeling and we have some representation of the feeling in submodalities. So that's the first way we can work with submodalities and anxiety. And this works even if it's not anxiety. So sometimes people will say they have anxiety. They'll come in, maybe as a coaching session. They'll say, I feel anxious in the situation. And you ask them about it and they don't feel anxious. They feel something else. They feel shame or guilt or anger or something else. The thing is, it doesn't even really matter if it's anxiety or not. That's just, one possible emotion. But all of our emotions have an external behavior, an internal state, an internal representation. So you can work with them really with similar principles. So then when it comes to internal representation, that's another way of working with submodalities that, again, there's a lot of methods there. So for that, I generally start off with a question like, what do you have to say to yourself or picture in your mind in order to get yourself to feel anxious? What do you have to say to yourself or picture in your mind in order to get yourself to feel that feeling of anxiety? Now, that's visual and auditory. There may be something else going on there, right? And say to yourself, it might not just be that you're saying it to yourself. You might be hearing the voice of your mother or your father speaking in your left ear right here. But it's a good place to start for people who are not NLP practitioners, who don't know all the details about all the things that could be happening internally. Most of the people I work with don't even realize that there's something happening that could be visual or auditory inside. So this is a new question for them. So I ask them, what do you have to say to yourself or picture in your mind in order to feel anxious? And then they go, eye accessing cues. You can notice what they're eye accessing. Oh, what did you picture right there? What did you say to yourself? And then they'll come up with something. And then you can work with that with submodalities. So again, submodalities are aspects of how we represent things that determine their meaning. So for instance, if someone's picturing when they are doing public speaking and they see an audience of people out there all looking very bored and their eyes are huge and they're looking at them and it's in full color and they're seeing out of their own eyes and so on, that gives you a lot of information about what you can then adjust or change in order to change their experience. So for instance, you could take them out of the picture and see the picture over there, and now they're in observer position and it's more neutral. Or you could shrink down the size of their eyes to normal size, or you could make it black and white, or you can adjust things in various ways to reduce the intensity. If they're saying something to themselves, now usually, and this is from Nick Kemp as well, a trainer in the UK, usually the voice tempo will be one of the things that drives the anxiety. In particular, they'll be speaking to themselves very, very quickly in their mind. They're saying, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to lose. I'm going to mess this up. Everything's going to go to heck. Ah! And so that fast internal dialogue allows for possible change, which is to slow that way down. So you don't even have to change the words they say, as long as you allow them to say it much, much slower. And that changes how they feel, to feel very relaxed. So you can take the same sentence, so write down the sentence they say, and then have them practice saying it much slower, even to the point of one word per breath, with a long pause in between each word. And when you have them do that inside their mind, not necessarily just out loud, but inside their mind, then they feel very calm. And that can change the whole situation very quickly in a few minutes for some people.
Can I ask a question there?
Yes, please.
I have used the voice tempo shift with clients, and it seems to work fine. But when I use it with myself, it seems to be so forced that while I speak slowly, it's like the Energizer Bunny starts to build up energy, and it's like, and I'm almost exploding after a while.
Okay. So in that case, so the energy builds up, and you're gesturing right here. Does it build up in your head? Does it build up in an internal dialogue by your ear? What builds up?
I'm really trying. Usually I have a very active internal dialogue.
Yeah.
But when I have tried this, I try to not speak to myself, even if that's not well, except for the slowing down.
Okay. Is the active internal dialogue that's happening while you're doing the process, is it the same dialogue as in the situation, or is it something else? Just you're thinking about something else and your mind's wandering off?
I try to neutralize it when I do this. So, but it's so I'm not sure if it's internal dialogue or if it's just some sort of energy cloud around me.
Okay, an energy cloud around you. So I would be interested in exploring the energy cloud around you and how big it is and what color it is and what shape it is and these sorts of things. And maybe relocating it to your center, the center of your body, or dissolving it into space like in Connie Ray Andreas's wholeness work or something like that. Because that's probably something that's not just in situations where you feel anxious, but like you said, you know, you have a active mind, which is a good thing. We don't want to stop your mind from being active, of course, but maybe that energy could be repurposed or centered or something like that, and that would also be a useful way to have that energy be going through your system.
Okay, thanks.
We could explore that right now if you wanted, or I could just keep talking. I mean, we can do whatever we want here, but
Please keep talking. It's I
okay.
I think it could
remember the first time I read Transforming Yourself, the book.
Yeah, so good.
And I was like almost blown away, because the sort of basic submodality shifts and map across, in a way, it seems so simple.
Yeah.
And if you read like newer NLP books and it's that's what they did in the 70s. We have some much more fancy techniques now.
Yeah.
What's your experience? Do you still do map across and those?
Yeah, good question. I do still do mapping across because it still works, even though it was developed long ago. If it stops working, I'll stop using it. But I think there are some keys to getting mapping across to work. Some people say, oh, I tried that, it stopped working. And of course, that's true. That can be true of any technique, that something can work for a little while and stop working. It's not just mapping across submodalities. But there's a couple keys, I think, to getting it to work. The first is in actually doing it. You know, sometimes you try to map across one of the submodalities. So mapping across submodalities, for, you know, not everyone's equally up to date. So I'll just explain what that is first. Is where, so with anxiety, for instance, how are you thinking about the situation in order to make yourself feel anxious? What are you saying to yourself? What are you picturing in your mind? And then how are you picturing that or saying that to yourself? So with the visual, it might be, you know, you have submodalities like location. Where is it located in space? Up here, over here, you know, in front of you, behind you. What size is it? Is it color in black and white? Do you see yourself in the picture, observer position, or are you looking at your own eyes, self position, and so on? So there's lists of this. I came up with like 45 or something recently. I was trying to be very comprehensive. You don't necessarily have to elicit 45 submodalities or do submodal mapping across. You know, 5 or 10 will do just fine. And then you also elicit submodalities for a resource state. So maybe it is confidence or a calmness or compassion, or I don't know what that resource would be in a particular situation. There's even like pre-given submodality lists, like in aligning perceptual positions, which is taught in the core transformation workshop. There's a list of basically submodalities that are very aligned, and you map across to those. It's a sort of a general resource state. So mapping across means when you're anxious, you're in self position, and you're calm in observer position, then you change it from self position to observer position. If you're anxious and the location of the picture is right here, and when you're calm, it's over here, then you move it to over there, and so on. So sometimes when you're moving the picture or changing the submodality, it doesn't want to go. That can be one problem that comes up. And if that happens, there's basically a couple things you can do. One is try to change one of the other submodalities first. So map across something else first, and that will often go smoothly, and then you can come back to it and it just goes. Another thing is often there's some sort of objection. There's some part of you that's like, well, I don't know, if I map this across, if I change, something bad will happen. I won't be loved. I won't get my needs met. I won't be able to be assertive, or something else will happen. I won't be safe. And so you need to meet that objection before you can map across. One of the easiest ways to do that is with both and framing. So both and framing, usually the person is thinking, well, it's either or. Either I can be safe or I can no longer have anxiety. And so if you just ask this sort of unconscious part of you, would it be okay if you were safe and you felt calm? Would it be okay if I felt safe and I was calm? Oh yeah, okay, it would be okay. And then you can do it. No objections. So that's one way. So if there's a problem actually doing the mapping across, you can do that. But your question was, do I still use the process of mapping across? And I do, because it works. And but sometimes people say, well, it stopped working. Well, sometimes it stops working because there was an objection that actually wasn't answered in the first place. And so Steve Andreas really emphasized asking for objections explicitly. Is there any part of you that objects to having this change in an ongoing way? And just asking that question whenever you do work, that can help prevent some of that. And sometimes there's no objection that can be determined right now, but there's some ecology concern. You know, you became calm, but you were too calm and you actually weren't assertive enough. And you didn't know that that was going to be a problem, but now it is. So now you need to build in assertiveness into that calm so that you can not be anxious and do it a different way. And thirdly, sometimes it's a matter of practice. I've been learning more and more that, you know, I don't know what percentage of the time, let's say 20%, I'm making that up, but 20% of the time, when you do an NLP process with someone and it works, it just sticks. You just have to do it one time. And that's where we get all these wonderful stories, and you have books written about that, like Heart of the Mind, and all these stories are like, oh, we just did it once and then it worked fine. But my experience working with clients is it doesn't always work that way. And working with myself, it usually doesn't work that way. I seem to be a hard client. But for me, what really does work is doing it 20 times. Even if that's just right now in 5 minutes. If I do it 20 times over and over again, and I practice, for me, that really links things up better. You know, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 20, maybe it's 30. But like in Transforming Yourself, if you've read that, Steve talks about creating a database of examples. And so for me, I need a lot of examples. I need 10 or 20 or 30 examples before I go, oh, okay, that works. And you might talk about as meta programs too, like a convincer strategy. Some people are convinced by seeing one example. Other people need to see, you know, 5 or 10 examples. Some people need to see 20 or 30. Some people need to see an infinite number of examples. They're never really convinced of anything. And I'm somewhere on that end of, I need to see a lot of examples. So for myself, if I create a bunch of examples in a database, it generally sticks, even if that takes me just 20 minutes. Whereas if I do it just once, like, it doesn't often stick for me. So that's one way to get it to stick.
Amazing, very interesting. We had a request or question in the chat here.
Okay.
Would it be possible to do a little demonstration or
that would be great.
Either with someone, or if you can do it with the whole group? Or
yeah, absolutely. Maybe we should do a one-on-one demonstration. If somebody has some anxiety they would like to transform, we can do, we'll see what process we do.
Okay, perfect. So let's hear it from our members here. Is anyone would like to get rid of some anxiety?
We have a hand up from Jenny Klund.
Jenny.
And
yes. Hi.
Hi.
I would be happy to let go of some anxiety today.
Wonderful. Good. And you can keep it private in terms of the details if you'd like. But you can, if you be willing to share just a little bit of information, like, oh, it's a relationship, or it's a financial situation, or something like that. It's general.
It's a relationship.
Okay, so there's a relationship where you feel some anxiety.
Yes.
Is it all the time, or just in a certain time?
It's in a certain time. It's a conflict between two persons, and I'm sort of in relation with both of them, so I'm getting in between.
I see. So there's a relationship, and you're in a conflict, or they're in a conflict, and you're in a relationship with each one of those people.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you think about that situation and put yourself back into that situation, do you notice some anxiety in your body that you feel?
Yeah, in my thorax.
In your thorax?
Yes, like in the chest and yeah, in my chest.
In your chest.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you notice that feeling in your chest, How big is it? Does it fill up your whole chest, or is it small in the middle, or?
It's sort of in the front of the chest.
In the front? Okay.
It's not connected to the spine. It's like it's covering the front.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's covering the front. And does it cover the whole front? Or
No.
how big? No.
It's like an area like here.
Like here.
Like the size of a plate or something.
The size of a plate. Okay. And does it have a color? What color is it?
Grayish, dark gray.
Grayish, dark gray. Okay. So what we'll explore is just seeing what would happen if it was in a different location and if it was a different size. Okay. So
yeah, sure.
here's how we'll do that. There's some metaphors built into our bodies, as we know from an area of research called embodied cognition. So you may have heard of some of these studies. Some people have, some people haven't. But like, if you get two people to sit in a room and you give them a warm beverage and they hold the warm glass and they drink it, so warm. And then you ask this person, how friendly was that person you just met?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Yeah.
And you give them another group a cold beverage. Oh, it's so cold. Yeah. And you ask, how friendly was this person? Oh, they weren't that friendly. Because we have this metaphor that warmth is friendliness.
Yep.
If someone's cold, they're not very friendly. So those are just built into our nervous systems. And similarly, there's a metaphor built into our nervous system, which is being centered, or in the center of something is like calm, like the center of a storm, a tropical storm. And then there's all this wind out here and it's like, destroying houses. And in the middle is just this spot where there's just nothing happening. It's just very calm in there. And so if you were the calm at the eye of the storm, then you would be very calm, even though people were fighting and you were in relation with them. And it wouldn't really, you could just be yourself and relate to these people in the way that you wanted. So we can get there by using the center of your body as a metaphor. And the center of your body is really below your belly button, about, this much.
Yeah, I know.
Yes, you're familiar with this. It's a thing in Eastern martial arts and Tai Chi.
Yeah, I'm doing yoga.
And yoga. So here's what we'll do. So imagine in front of you is a full-length mirror. You can close your eyes or keep them open, whichever's easier for you to see. So imagine in front of you is a full-length mirror, and you can see your hair and your face in that mirror, and you can see those white earbuds coming down, and you can see that shirt and the color of your shirt. And if you look down even farther below your belly button, you can see a tiny little spot like the center of your body, just like a tiny dot, no larger than a grain of sand. And then in your chest, you can also see this gray plate-like color that represents that anxiety.
It's like floating out on my body. It's like
in the front and floating out.
Outside.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And so when you see that in the mirror, here's what we'll do on the count of 3. On the count of 3, see in that mirror that plate gray thing shrinking down smaller and smaller and smaller and getting sucked into that tiny little dot at the center of your being, like there's a powerful magnet or attractive force, a black hole in the center of your belly, center of your body.
I actually have a resistance for pulling it inwards. I want to move it away from me.
Okay, so you want to move it away from you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, we can move it away from you too if you want. Let's try that.
Yeah.
So it's outside of you.
I think I can do both actually.
Oh, you can do both?
Sort of disappear.
Oh, okay. Resistance already disappeared just by saying we could do that. Okay.
It's splitting up in 2. One moves forward and one moves towards my center.
Okay, perfect. Yes. So if there's any element of that that's not you or that's not yours, you can send it away. Maybe send it back to those people or to whoever it belongs to. And the rest of it, imagine shrinking it down into your center and absorbing it completely within that point. Does that work for you?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And because it's in your lower belly, you can either store it there, keep it there. and feel centered, or you can digest all that energy and allow it to circulate throughout your body wherever it's needed, whenever it's needed, trusting the wisdom of your unconscious mind to do that in the way that's best for you. Okay.
Yeah.
How was that?
Different. It's good and it feels different.
It's good and it feels different.
Yeah.
And when you think about that situation with those two people who are in conflict, they're probably still in conflict, right? This didn't resolve that part of it.
No. It's like me being dissociated from them and their conflict, so I can see them from a distance. They're parted from me. I'm not in the center.
Good.
I didn't even know I put myself there, but obviously I did, and now I'm not.
Yeah, now you're not. That's good. That's better. And so let's just practice a few times. Like I just said, some people, you might already be done. I don't know if you know how many times you need.
Not so many usually.
Not so many. Okay, maybe just one more then.
Yeah, sure.
So imagine sometime in the future, you'll run into these people and maybe you'll run into one of them and they'll tell you, oh, so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And they'll try to get you involved in the conflict. And what's that like for you now?
Since this has happened before, I'm back at the good place where I have been previous when this has happened.
Good.
So grounded, I would say.
Grounded. Yeah. Great. So I think it sounds like you're done because you know that you don't need that many examples. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Does anybody have any questions about that? I mean, it was pretty straightforward, but if there's any questions, I could ask or answer them. I don't see anybody.
I think it was great. And the way you fed back the exact words, the exact metaphors. Do you consciously use clean language? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I'm not trained in clean language. I've been a recipient of that experience a few times, and that was interesting. But yeah, I more use just the standard NLP rapport model of using the exact words rather than changing them too much to stay within their metaphors and their experience representations.
Yeah. Very good.
Thanks. Yeah, and of course, there were a lot of ways we could have worked with that, right? I mean, that wasn't the only way. I decided to work with the feeling and the representation of the feeling, but you could have very easily worked with the representation of the two other people, because that's immediately what came up, right? Is there were two other people involved, and we could have worked with that and changed submodalities or stepped out of the picture more, or any number of things there. So that's one thing I want to mention, just when we're working with anxiety or anything else. There's just so many different ways to do it. There's no one right way. The only, I guess, right way would be the one that works for the individual. Like I thought, we'll just take it all and put it in the center, which is what I often do with people. But she was like, no, I have resistance to it. So we weren't going to do that, because it was clear to her and her unconscious that part of that didn't need to go there or needed to go somewhere else. And that was true. So we needed to incorporate that and utilize it. And that's the key when doing any process, of course, whether it's anxiety or something else, is to really be responsive to the person you're working with, whether that's yourself or a client or something like that.
And do you have a system for choosing which part to work with, or do you just test your way? If you work with...
Yeah, it's not so much an explicit system, but I do trust my intuition in terms of what words they're using and what sort of makes sense to me. So if somebody, if somebody immediately has obvious eye accessing cues or says, well, I say to myself, blah, 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 or, I just see this happening, then I will use that because it's just right there. But if somebody says, I don't know what I picture, even though they're going like this, and they can't access that, but I know I have this feeling, I just feel like I got punched in the chest. Well, then I'll just start with that, because that's what's available in their experience right now.
Great.
So that gives me a question too about the clean language and the way you asked her to do what to do with the feeling. So do you most often choose what the client does with the feeling, or do you clean language ask what would like to happen or what would like to do with the feeling? Sometimes they have the answer, which is
Yeah, those are again options that you have as a practitioner. I usually just try something and see what happens and get feedback from the trying and then adjust, just like I did there when she was like, no, it doesn't want to come in. I'm like, okay, let's do something else. But you can also just ask them or ask their unconscious with clean language what wants to happen. That is a very hands-off way to do it, which also works for many people. I'm not sure if everybody would respond equally to that because I don't do clean language, so I don't know. Maybe it works for everybody, or maybe it, some people like a little bit more direction from the facilitator. Yeah, I find it works fine just to throw something out as long as I'm also responsive to what's happening. Now, what I don't think works very well, and what clean language I think tries to address, is when you force a process or an intervention or values on the person, and then they resist more, and then you're in this power dynamic, and nobody's happy. So aggressively forcing a process or a way to do things on people doesn't work very well. But suggesting something and then being responsive to when it doesn't work seems to work fine. And I find that works in daily life too.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I was curious, since I know you also do a lot of hypnosis.
Yeah.
Do you usually do submodality work in the sort of NLP style outside of an induction, or do you do it as well, or most of the time in hypnosis, whatever that is?
Yeah, I often don't do inductions, even though I'm a hypnotist, because I feel like if somebody can access submodalities in that moment, they're in a light trance state at the very least. They're inwardly focused. They're focused on a detail of their experience and absorbed into it in a way that they're not usually. But it depends on the person. If the person is coming to me for hypnosis, well, then I want them to have an experience that matches their expectations, at least somewhat. And so I'll guide them into a hypnotic experience first. And with some people, they can't access their internal experience very well until they are more internally focused with hypnosis. And so that's a useful tool to guide them in there first, whether it's 5 minutes or 15 minutes, to guide them into a state where they can access their internal resources and experience better. And some people also get distracted very easily. They pop out, they start talking about something else. And for that, I think hypnosis is useful to get them more absorbed, maybe even do an eye lock of like, oh, you try to lift your eyes and you find that you can't. So at least you'll stay focused on the process for a while. And that can be a useful thing for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Should I just talk more? Are we done? Do we want to do a demo?
Would you mind talking a little bit about core transformation when do you use that as a tool with a client or yourself?
So core transformation, I'll just give a little bit of an overview of what that is in case people don't know. It is a method developed by Connie Ray Andreas and Tamara Andreas. Full disclosure, I still work for Connie Ray Andreas, so I'm very biased in favor of it being an amazing process. And it also really, really worked well for me. So the basic idea in core transformation is that if we have any unwanted thought, behavior, feeling, response, that is as if it's generated by some unconscious part of us, because it happens automatically. We're not putting it on our to-do list. Make sure to get angry when people cut me off in traffic. Oh, I forgot. Oh, I got to write it down. It just happens automatically. So it's as if some unconscious part of you is doing that. And then we have the NLP presupposition of positive intent. We can assume that there's some positive intention for why you're doing this or why this part of you is doing that. even though it doesn't seem very positive on the surface, underneath there's some good reason, to try to protect you or to, get love or something like that, even if it doesn't work as a strategy. So to discover what those things are, we locate the part, just like we located the feeling a moment ago. Where is this part of you that makes you feel anxious or angry or whatever it is, or, engages in some behavior you don't like? And then welcome it, assume it has a positive intention, and ask the part, what do you want? What do you want by doing that? What's your positive intention? Just like 6-step reframing, it's really an extension of 6-step reframing to a very high degree. But instead of just going 1 or 2 levels deeper, as in 6-step reframing, I want respect. Okay, great. You don't just negotiate between parts, then you keep going. So what do you want through having respect that's even deeper, and so on and so on. And you keep going until there's nothing deeper. And at that point, you have really some beautiful experience that many people would call spiritual. Something like beingness, peace, oneness, universal love. Stuff that sounds really cheesy if you're not experiencing it. But when you're actually experiencing it, is really wonderful and beautiful and feels amazing. It feels like coming home. And for me, I didn't really have access to any of those states. So that was a profound thing for me. And for me, one thing I noticed is when I did normal NLP processes on myself, I'd often get partial results, or I wouldn't get any results at all. And other people were getting great results. Even people I was doing the processes on would get great results, and I would get sort of mediocre results. And what I discovered with core transformation was that was because I had lots of parts of me objecting, well, in fact, I had one that I discovered early on when doing core transformation, which was saying, well, am I just making all this stuff up? Is this really coming from my unconscious mind? Or, am I just pretending? And that was interfering not just with core transformation, but with every NLP process I did on myself. And when I really integrated that part of me with core transformation, it not only allowed me to do core transformation better, it allowed me to do NLP better on myself and with my clients. All sorts of techniques that didn't work before were now working just fine. And so that's one reason why I think almost everybody who does NLP should at least do some core transformation, just to see if there's any parts of them that are, just in the background that you wouldn't necessarily work with a process because you don't even notice, but they come up and they interfere with things in ways that you might not know. So for me, that really helped me to transform anxiety and also depression that I had for many years, and a host of other things. I was just having fun with it, so I kept doing it almost every day, just running through the process for several years, until I felt like, okay, I got everything out of this I can possibly get out of it. And so in terms of working with clients, when do I bring that up? When do I use that? Well, at first I was just sold on core transformation. I was like, this is the only technique you need. I'm just going to do this all the time. And so I did it with everyone. And what I discovered was that you kind of need some other techniques too, even though it's very widely applicable and very useful in general. I had a couple experiences that didn't go well with clients with this wonderful technique that integrates all parts, welcomes them, assumes positive intention. But some of my clients, they weren't really ready to go there. They didn't really come in for a spiritual experience. They came in to have a little less anxiety. And going that deep in their experience wasn't where they were at. And so I had one client, for instance, who I was working with anxiety. And it was a very strange session. This was a college student who was referred to me by a friend who was this person's yoga teacher. And he wanted to be there. And so he was, and she was okay with that. And I was okay with that. So he was in the room, and so this person was in the room, and I was guiding this person through core transformation. And we weren't getting to the bottom, the core state, as it's called. We just kept having outcome after outcome after outcome. And then suddenly the client got nonverbal. They weren't responding verbally anymore. They went to this very deep trance. The yoga teacher, a friend of mine who has insomnia, started snoring right next to me. So he's snoring, she's in a deep trance, not in verbal, and I'm like, what do I do? So I just use my best Ericksonian language patterns, and I say, oh, good, and the state you're in right now can deepen as you find your own healing and wisdom and intuition and blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, on the count of 10, you'll wake up and come back into the room. And she thought it was a very profound session. He didn't know what happened because he'd fell asleep. And so I was like, okay, maybe that helped. Unfortunately, that night, the client had a panic attack, and she had never had a panic attack before in her life. And I thought, oh no, you know, this was a abreaction. This is an ecology issue. So I offered to see her again the next day for free and to do less deep NLP work, kind of like, you know, what I've been discussing here today, more voice tempo and submodalities. And we did that. And she was happy, and I still felt like, oh, I should have known. But I guess I heard back from her through my friend a few months later, and she had said that was the first thing that ever made a difference in her anxiety, and it was already starting to loosen and shift. So that wasn't necessarily even a failed session, but it did make me think that for some people, the submodality work or something a little more superficial might actually be more helpful at first, because they're not really coming for a big spiritual transformation. But on the other hand, maybe that's what actually made a difference for her. So I'm not sure. But that is sort of informing my intuition about when to use core transformation. Is I don't always use it with people who don't appear to me to be wanting that, even though it's amazing, wonderful stuff. And I think it's something everyone should at least do a few times. I don't always use it.
I'm curious, since you work with Connie Ray, we have had her here on in a webinar.
Oh, great!
And she talked about the wholeness process.
Yeah.
So for those of you listening to this that wants to learn more about the wholeness process, you can go to our site and watch the webinar with Connie Ray Andreas. Yeah. But I'm just curious, you that know this so much, when would you use core transformation versus the wholeness process?
That's a good question. Yeah. So Connie Ray thinks of it as that wholeness. Well, core transformation's not quite as good as at transforming trauma. So I think they both work very, very well in a similar direction towards wholeness, really. I actually have encouraged Connie Ray to think of core transformation and aligning perceptual positions as under the banner of the wholeness work, because they all point towards wholeness in a way that's somewhat different than NLP, because NLP is usually outcome focused, like, you know, I want to be calm instead of anxious. Whereas with core transformation, you start with anxiety, you don't know what you're going to get. You start with wholeness, or you do wholeness, like, you know, it's going to be better, you're going to be more whole, and you're not going to have anxiety, but you don't know what you're going to have instead. So I work with core transformation usually first before wholeness for two reasons. One is to transform old trauma that someone might have still lying around. Because at the end of core transformation, there's a couple pieces that really help with that. It's really timeline work. So you have this growing up apart. So once you get the nice core state, you bring it back through all the outcomes, the original problem. You could stop there, or there's these other parts of the process. And one thing is you ask, how old is the part? Oh, it's 2 years old. Okay. And you give it the, say, piece at 2 years old. You have it evolve up to your current age. That tends to transform a lot of traumatic experiences. And then at the end, you also do a timeline generalization. Imagine in front of you is a line extending out in front of you, and that same line extending back behind you, even if your timeline's not normally organized that way for us NLPers. And then float up, float back, take that piece with you as you drop down onto the very start, move along the timeline, allow the piece to transform all those experiences. I'm going through it very fast, but that's the basic idea. You can transform a lot of the past and even into the future with the timeline generalization, whereas the wholeness work doesn't have that. Actually, I was just talking with Connie Ray the other day about this and wondering if you could just add it back in. And I asked her that. It's like, why not just put a timeline generalization into wholeness work? And she said Tamara actually does that when she does wholeness work. She adds a timeline generalization at the end, the same sort of thing as in core transformation, which I thought was kind of interesting. But then Connie Ray says she doesn't do it because of her own experience is that it seems like it's kind of going backwards for her, like it's constructing more things that don't need to be constructed for her experience. So that might be unique to her. Tamara joked, I guess, with Connie Ray that she's not so evolved as Connie Ray, that she still does it and it works for her. But I think there may be some unique individual differences too. I don't know if it's about being evolved or being at a higher level or lower, whatever, more advanced. But I can also understand that at some point doing the wholeness work, if you're familiar with that, it's about, so similar to, like, you could do this for anxiety and it would work too. You find the location of anxiety, but instead of moving it and changing it and shrinking it into a point or changing the color or something, you then find, where is the I that's aware of that? And that's a strange question that most people have never thought of before. But usually there's a sense of I, where is my sense of identity? And it's in the head, or it's in the chest, or it's outside the head, or something like that. And then that has a location, a size, a shape, a sensation, quality. And you can even get chains of eyes. Where's the I that's aware of that? And so on. And then you invite the outermost I to open and relax as the space of awareness, which is all around and throughout. No boundaries, no borders, no size, location, sensation, quality. And you do that with each one of those things and the original sensation. And then you're just, it feels nice. Feels nice and enlightened, at least temporarily. And so that's a really wonderful way of working with anxiety. And there's some other aspects to that process too. That's just the first one of many versions of that process in the wholeness work. And I guess you could do timeline generalization at that point too, but depending on whether you're Tamara or Connie Ray, it may or may not fit for you. But yeah, I think most people don't have that sense of awareness first before they do core transformation. At least I certainly didn't myself. I actually got that sense of the awareness through Vipassana meditation, 10-day meditation retreats with S.N. Goenka. That's where it's a body scan technique. You spend 10 days just scanning your body head to toe. First 3 days focusing on the breath at your nostrils, and then 7 days just feeling your body very precisely. And for me, I had a powerful experience on one of those retreats where suddenly my body felt like it was infinitely large and was opened up into space. And that was pretty amazing. And after that, I started doing core transformation, and it made sense to me. Whereas before that, it didn't make sense to me. And similarly, I think wholeness work may or may not make sense to some people. Like, what is this awareness that I'm dissolving into? What is that? Whereas other people, it's a very, very profound experience. So it's a matter of timing, I think. Similarly with, like, when I do core transformation, some people don't want to go there, and other people are very, very happy to be there.
We had a question. Is it possible to do a demo of core transformation now, or is it too long, or? It's
usually pretty long. We could try. I don't know how long you want to go.
Well, I stay as long as possible.
Okay, because it can take 15 to 20 minutes the minimum, and
okay,
an hour, even more potentially. But we could do a very basic version as a group if you want.
Sure.
That won't take very long. So, would everybody like to get comfortable, make yourself comfortable for an experience? Adjusting your body and finding the place that's right for you. And whenever you are ready, you can close your eyes and just feel what you feel in your body, the feeling of the chair, the weight of your body, listening to the sound of my voice, and knowing that you can experience changes within. So to just try out this process of core transformation, I'd like you to pick something mild, not your life's biggest issue, but something mild, just to explore for a moment. Now that can be a feeling or state. that you'd rather not experience, a small irritation maybe, something annoying. It could be a minor behavior that you're engaged in, a bad habit that you'd rather not have. It could be a response that you have to someone else, or a thought or belief you have about yourself. Anything that's automatic and just happens. Not something you do consciously, but just something that happens as if there's some unconscious part of you that is doing this thing. So whenever you've selected the thing you want to explore today, notice, where is the unconscious part of you that generates this feeling, thought, response, belief, whatever it is? Where is this part of you located? Is it in your head or throat, chest, belly? And as you notice where that part of you is located, realize that most of the time when we have a response like this that we don't like, we try to push away these parts of us or make them wrong or bad or cut them out. And that doesn't really work, does it? Because if it's a part of you, you can't really get rid of it. And trying to do that just creates more inner conflict. So instead, let's try something new. Welcome this unconscious part of you. And assume that it has some positive intent, some positive purpose for why it does what it does. Now, with this sense of curiosity about this part of you, ask this unconscious part now, what do you want? In the most gentle, kind voice you can imagine, ask the part, what do you want? And just notice whatever response comes back from this part of you. It might be obvious, like a word or phrase, or the response might be subtle, like a flash of an image, a symbol that doesn't make any conscious sense, or a subtle change in feeling. If you haven't gotten a response yet, that's okay. Just sit with that question. What do you want? What do you want by doing this thing that you do? And whatever response you get, just thank this part of you for its response. Really appreciate this part of you for letting you know that's what it's wanting. And then invite the part to step into what it's like when it already has what it's wanting. Fully and completely using your imagination to step into an experience of what it's like when you already have that, when that is already completely satisfied, whatever that is. And then ask that part of you, what do you want through having that first outcome that's even deeper, or that's even more important than that? And again, just wait for the response that you get from this part of you. Some people have parts that respond right away, and other people have parts that take a few moments to really think about it before responding. And it doesn't really matter whether the answer comes right away or it takes a little while. Either way, you can appreciate this part of you for letting you know what it's wanting at an even deeper level. And again, once you get a response, if you don't have one yet, that's okay. Just wait patiently and maybe repeat the question very gently inside. What do you want through having that? It's even deeper. And again, ask this part of you when you do get the second outcome to step into and have that fully and completely, whether that's respect or love or safety or peace or to get this person to do this thing I want or whatever it is. Imagine what it would be like if you already have that outcome in your experience. And when you really have that, ask the part, what do you want through having that second outcome that's even deeper or more important? And again, waiting for the response, noticing what that response is, whether it's a word or a picture or a feeling or something else. And thank and appreciate this part of you for wanting that. If it's a positive thing, you can now realize that this part of you is very positive. And it's wanting good things for you. And so again, you can repeat this process of inviting the part to step into what it's wanting fully and completely in experience. And then ask the part, what do you want through having that that's even deeper? And if you get a response from that, you can appreciate that part of you and so on. Take your time. Not everyone will go at the same pace here. But it's the same process again and again. What do you want through having that that's even deeper? And then stepping into that fully and completely. And eventually you'll get to something that's no deeper. There's just nothing deeper than that, whether it's beingness or peace or oneness or aliveness or joy or love, universal love. And I don't know what that is for you or for this part of you. And it's also okay if you're not getting there yet. If you're still at the first or second outcome, or even if you have another part of you that steps in and says, you can't have that, or otherwise interrupts. That's okay too, because that's just a part of you that also has some deeply positive intention, isn't it? And in time, you can get to know all those parts and what they're wanting. They're asking the same questions. What do you want? Invite the part to step into that. What do you want through having that that's even deeper or more important? Stepping into that. And so on until you get to something that's no deeper. And this is just a short experience. There's a lot more to it, but perhaps you've gotten a good sense of it already. So in a moment, you can come all the way back into the room only as quickly as you feel awake and alert and revived and refreshed, and know that you've learned something useful today. Stretching.
Very nice. Thank you.
Would anyone like to share something they experienced about that?
Oh yeah, for me it was pretty profound.
Yeah.
I got tears from the first feeling, which was negative, and but it pretty quickly shifted into something beautiful.
Yeah.
And from then on, they went together. Those two, those two tearing feelings were both joy and sadness until well, pretty much going still. But it's like it's okay.
Good. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for the demo.
You're welcome. Yeah. Anybody else want to share?
I had like an epiphany. It was like going back in time, looking at myself from a distance, and it's like, oh wow, this is what it's about.
Oh,
that was really cool. Really,
so you
really
learned something about yourself and your
past.
past.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was like a key.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
I found a change of perspective when we were doing this even deeper stuff. My perspective was downwards, so I was facing downwards even deeper, even deeper, and all of a sudden I was at the bottom, facing up instead.
Interesting.
So the perspective just changed.
Yeah.
And then I know I hit the ground floor. That was nice. And the bottom was red. I was standing on some red glass of some kind.
So you had some visual perspective shift and color involved in your experience as well.
Yeah, so the modalities changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, so this is something I will often use with clients, although not always, because it is, sometimes we talk about an NLP generative change, where you get not just what you were going for, but you also get something else that's much bigger. And I think that's definitely true from wholeness work and core transformation. It's sometimes true from other NLP processes as well. And as I said before, not everybody wants generative change. So it's something to be aware of, that not everyone is ready for that. Any other questions or things you want me to talk about or demo before we wrap up? I don't know how long we want to go, maybe 15, 20 more minutes, if at most.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe we have some more questions.
Anything about anxiety, how to work with anxiety, or just about NLP in general? Happy to talk about anything.
Well, I have a reflection over the demo we just had.
Yes.
So it was nice that when we search for some answer for the question, it didn't necessarily need to be a word.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's not.
Yeah, and that's important with core transformation specifically. That sometimes when I'm facilitating with this, somebody will say, "Oh, I'm not getting an answer," and I'll say, "Okay, well, what just happened in your experience And they'll say, well, I don't know, I felt this feeling in my chest. Like, oh, and that happened when you asked the question. Yeah. So there's a response. Oh, I guess so. And that's, the unconscious mind doesn't always work in words. Sometimes we can translate it into words, but oftentimes we get a picture or a feeling instead of words. And our culture, tends to be very verbal. We do a lot of verbal learning for many, many years, and we don't do a lot of describing our feelings in precise detail.
Yeah.
Talking about the mental images that come to mind. And so people don't value that, and they don't realize that's coming from their experience. So as a facilitator, it's important to point out that responses don't necessarily need to be verbal.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe even try not to be in words.
Right. Sometimes it's more powerful if it's not in words. Especially as you go deeper in core transformation in particular, and the outcomes, become something maybe more profound. Often it's harder for people to put words onto it. To talk about it, you still need some sort of label. And so that's what I'll say is, what label can we give it? It won't capture the full experience, but what label can we put on it? A label of peace may not capture the profound experience that you're having, but we can at least talk about it then.
Very nice. When working with anxiety, do you work with children or teenagers as well? And can you say something about the difference?
I don't generally work with children or teenagers. I know Mark Andreas very well, and he's written a book on how to work with teenagers, so I refer to him. But I think it's a very similar process for teenagers. For children, it might be a little different because they have a different experience. But teenagers get that, we have an internal dialogue and make pictures and feel things in our bodies, and they can do that sort of thing. But I generally refer out for that.
Have you found, when working with a lot of anxiety, have you found what causes anxiety more for you, young, and for people in general? And second question to that, how do you think it's connected to stress?
I'd say in terms of what causes anxiety, there's just so many things. I mean, our world is very anxiety producing. We've got a lot going on. Things are getting faster and faster. Stresses from academic achievement to trying to get ahead in the workplace to what's going on at home to just being busy all the time. One of the things I think that shows up a lot for people now is just filling up every moment of free time with activity, whether that's scrolling social media or trying to get something done. If we don't take time to reset, then it can build up. And I see that a lot. Like if someone has panic attacks, for instance, that's where anxiety has gotten to the absolute extreme. And I don't think there's any such thing as a person having panic attacks who doesn't have a high baseline of general anxiety. But usually those people don't realize that they've had general anxiety. They're so disconnected from how they feel and from what is normal in terms of being in a rest state, that they've lived in an anxiety state for so long that now they're having panic attacks and they're like, oh, these came out of nowhere. And they might think it's very physical, like, oh, I'm having a heart attack or something's wrong with me physically. And there might be, and they need to get checked out by a doctor to make sure. But usually they've had a high baseline of stress and they don't really stop and process that in some way or metabolize that or self-soothe. And they don't know how. So there's a lot of things that can cause anxiety, but I think one of them is just, not really knowing how to inhibit the stress response, the sympathetic nervous system, and get into parasympathetic. I don't think it's enough, though, to just do relaxation exercises or yoga or meditation for most people. I've seen a lot of advanced yogis and meditators for anxiety. So they will do yoga or meditation, and when they're doing yoga or meditation, they have no anxiety. But as soon as they stop, it comes back because the triggers are still there. Like in NLP, we talk about, in what context does this come up, or what has to happen right before you feel anxious. So those cues are still there. They're still programmed into the nervous system. even though you can get into a calm state for an hour or two a day, the rest of the time, you step onto stage to speak and you still feel anxious, or you're in a social situation and you still feel anxious, or you're driving and you still feel anxious, and so on, because the cues are the same. They weren't really transformed by that other practice. But I do think meditation, yoga, relaxation exercises are useful. They're much better than not doing them, which a lot of people have no space. They fill in all of their free time with activity. And so there's never any time to just settle and do nothing. So there's a lot of reasons for causes, but yeah, I don't focus too much on causes when I work with people. I focus on what they can do and how they do it in their mind, in their brain. So that even if the causes are still out there in the world, the public speaking still exists, the driving still exists, the social context still exists, but now they don't cause the anxiety.
So sorry, I just have so many questions.
Feel free. Good.
Anyone else has one, just raise hands. But so do you give clients tips on what they can do with NLP by themselves, or do you only do the practice in your
I do, yeah. And I encourage people to do it, and often they don't anyway, but at least I give them something they can do. Often the first thing I'll get people to do with anxiety is just a simple exercise, throwing a ball back and forth between your hands. Many people have seen this. It's called, you can call it fancy terms like bilateral hemispheric stimulation, which basically means both sides of your brain are doing something. But I explain it like this. I say, I actually got this from Andy Austin in the UK. He's a great trainer. He has his own system, Metaphors of Movement. And he also has an eye movement thing, integral eye movement therapy. So he will teach people to throw a ball back and forth in their hands like this. So you don't cross the midline of your body. You throw it from one hand to another, more at waist level, but you can't see my waist, so I'll just do it here. And the basic technique I've identified as, I call it the MIT method, which doesn't have to do with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the United States. It stands for Measure, Increase, Throw. I created that acronym to describe his process because there's actually three things. It's not just the throwing. So first you measure the intensity of the feeling 0 to 10. Let's say it's a 7. And then you increase. So you ask them, can you make it an 8? And they go, yeah. And you're like, oh, interesting. Everybody I've ever asked that question of can make it more intense. They can't make it go away, but they can make it more intense, which starts to get them to realize they're participating in creating the anxiety, and also start to put it back in their control. It's prescribing the symptom in Ericksonian terms. So you get it to make them more intense. Maybe you make it even more intense than that. Can you make it a 9? Can you make it a 10? Can you full-blown panic attack? If you really want to push it, you don't have to go that far. And then you have them throw the ball back and forth, and you explain that when you're anxious, only part of your brain is lighting up. Depending on which study of a brain scan of anxious people, it's either the right or left hemisphere, but it's not both. And so if you throw a ball back and forth between your hands, not only are you distracting yourself for a second, you're also lighting up both hemispheres of the brain. You could do the same thing by looking back and forth as they originally did in EMDR, although I hear now that they're not even using eye movements in EMDR anymore. They're just using buzzers that buzz back and forth between your hands, or tapping on your knees, but it's a similar principle that you're getting both sides of your brain lit up. And you do this for a couple minutes, and then you repeat the process. Now 0 to 10, how intense is the feeling? And they say, oh, it's a 6. Okay, so it went from a 7 to a 9 to a 6. Interesting. And then you repeat, can you make it a 7? Can you make it an 8? After several rounds of this, they can't even get it back up to the original number, 7. So maybe it's a 3, and they try to get up, they can get up to a 5, but they can't get any higher. And then you can start to explain, okay, well, looks like you can't get it back up to a 7. Things are already changing. You can't get it back to where it was. And you're also training that whenever the feeling goes up, it's about to come back down. So you're starting to condition that. And you also train them that whenever they're feeling anxious, they can just throw a ball back and forth and calm themselves down. Like I was saying, many anxious people don't know how to self-soothe. They don't know how to reach a state of parasympathetic, where they're not anxious at all. So training them to do this, you can get to a 0 even after, maybe 30 minutes throwing back and forth. And most people have never experienced a 0 for a long time if they've been anxious. So that's a neat thing you can do. It's very simple. Other questions?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we are about to wrap up. I was going to ask you one last question, but you sort of talked about it. The question was something like, what would be the one skill you recommend people learn in this more modern lifestyle?
Yeah. Yeah, I think the ability to inhibit the fight or flight response, really. And there's lots of ways to do that, obviously. So turning off stress. All the NLP tools you've already learned, I think many of them are oriented towards that. Even simple things like throwing a ball back and forth or relaxation techniques. Any way that you can turn off the stress response and spend a few minutes a day relaxed is good. But especially if you can link that up. That's what neuro-linguistic programming, I think, does so much better than even standard hypnosis or psychotherapy, is that at the programming part, is that programming a computer is really about creating lines of code that are mostly if this, then that. If this happens, then do that. And that's really how our nervous system works too. Our brains are kind of like computers. They're not computers, obviously, but they're kind of like them, and that we have a similar like if this, then that. And so anxiety triggers off in a specific context with a specific cue reliably every time. It's not something you have to remember to do. And so if you can transform that, not only inhibit the sympathetic nervous system after you've become anxious, but inhibit it and then link it to that cue so that it doesn't even happen in the first place, that's of course a much better solution.
That's a fantastic distinction. Thank you so much. Yeah.
And that's what the programming part of neuro-linguistic programming is all about, is making those things automatic. So that you don't have to repeat it every time. You don't have to necessarily spend an hour every day meditating, although I do as well, and that's great. It can give other benefits, but the programming part is what makes it so much more efficient.
This has been amazing, and I will let Ulf say something before I will let you go here. But before, if people want to learn more about you and find you, where do they go?
You can go to my website, duffmcduffee.com. That's DUFFMCDUFFEE at the end. Or you can add me on Facebook. I'm on Facebook way too much, probably addicted. But I love chatting with people about NLP and hypnosis on Facebook. So that's the place I do that.
Yeah. I follow you on Facebook.
Yeah, good.
So I just want to tune in here from Slovenia and say a short hi, Duff. I'm sorry I couldn't be on the full thing. I've been following it, on mute because I didn't want to disturb, because my connection has been really shitty here. But it's been amazing, really, really fun. Everything I heard, I really enjoyed. So it's been a great pleasure to have you. And remember, Duff is in our book. He's in Swedish. He's translated.
Hopefully it was translated well. I can't read Swedish, so.
It's a wonderful translation. Jenny and Fredrik and I did it. No, Jenny and Fredrik did it only.
Wonderful. Good.
Yes.
Yes, and thank you so much for having me on this webinar. I really appreciate it. Just love talking about this stuff and sharing how to do these things with people. We're in a pretty rare community. I talk to people outside of the NLP world, and they don't even realize that it's possible to reprogram automatic responses. I get that a lot. So, we have some specialized knowledge here, and the more we can share it with the world, the better.
Wow. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.